Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host and producer, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, attorney Sonia Madison. How you doing, Sonia?
Way to use that masculinity to take accountability. I love to see it.
I have
I,
no idea what happened this morning. It was just I don't know. It just happened. I'm gonna soak it up. I'm gonna chalk it up to the nice breakfast that my wife made for me this morning in honor of
um,
Father's Day. I hope it was in honor of Father's Day, but she didn't bring it to me in bed. So I woke up, I smelled breakfast cooking. I was like, "Oh, she's gonna bring me breakfast in bed because she know I'll be at church early tomorrow morning." So
oh, I
yeah,
mean,
got
I know your
breakfast.
wife. You get breakfast quite often, so I'm sure that was just her normal routine.
I think it was, but I like to think that it was an early Father's Day gift. So that's the way I'm gonna treat it. My
Well,
wife is the best.
she is,
Mm.
and especially considering who she's married to, you got to
Let me.
be you
I
got to
do
be
want to say. I do want to say this. I think every person should have a good wife. I will. And I'm gonna give you this point right here. I think wives are the best thing on earth. It's even if women could have wives,
I
I'm not
mean,
sure.
depending on your sexuality, I think that is possible.
Right. I don't even know. I don't even know what the benefit of a husband is to women, but at this point,
Speaking
I
of
think
wives, right?
right. Yeah, that might be the benefit that we offer. We can help you become mothers.
I hear it's going to be raining and possible thunderstorms in New York. So if that takes off, then the day
That
may be
means
good. Maybe that's a
no more
sign.
King Day. No more King Day.
Perhaps the parade shall not go on. But yeah, we do know that today we're supposed to be celebrating what the win of the World War One or two or something. Who knows? But what we're kind
250th
of
anniversary of or birthday of the military, supposedly.
okay.
250th birthday. And if there are protests, it will be met with swift and fierce force. So God better not protest this with
With
with the
thunderstorms.
rain.
Although I don't know what protest means because you asked the White House correspondent, then she's saying, "Oh well," oh the White House press secretary, "Oh, of course he's okay with peaceful protests," but then we saw the LA pretty much National Guard dispense on the LA protests, and for the most part, those were peaceful. And if anything, the National Guard escalated it to something beyond what it initially was. And so I don't know what President Trump means by protests, but I would dare say peaceful or non-peaceful. You may want to ask yourself, do I want the National Guard on me?
Mm,
Although,
I
I
think
mean, again, I don't
sometimes.
want to discourage that though, because at the same time, we are the fact that we're having a parade for his quote unquote birthday
Mm.
does send a message of where we're heading.
Do you think it would occur if it wasn't simultaneously with the occurring with the 250th anniversary of the military?
Well, tell me, have we ever celebrated in this capacity?
But we've never been 250 years old either, though. So,
We had 100, we had 200. I mean, this doesn't warrant the parade now. And again, we know what this is about. But the bigger picture is if we're spending close to 45 million on this parade and keeping in mind that we're in a deficit, keeping in mind that he keeps saying, oh, we're gonna reduce waste. I mean, you tell me, is this a good use of resources?
I think not. I guess if you're North Korea, Kim Jong Un, and you just need to try to flex your muscles other kind of way and show everybody that you're the king. Then yeah, sure, we need it. And of course, he denies the fact that he's trying to act like or seem like a king. But I'm going to the parade, by the way.
What parade are you going to?
The King Parade, King Day Parade.
Oh, are you going in protest or is you... Oh,
I'm going
please
to
don't report
fawn. I'm going to
back.
fawn over our president like they do Kim Jong Un, so that when he walks past, the ladies pass out. Ah.
Well, again, go and report back. But how's your week been?
My week has been interesting. I don't know how my week has been.
It goes
I
by
really don't. It went by so quickly. It's hard to tell. I'm adjusting to new type of position at work, and I don't know that it's anything's changed necessarily. But I will say this: I did Thursday. I had a morning full of surgeries, reminiscent of what I used to do every Thursday morning, and that was a good flashback, just because I used to do 12, 13 cases on a Thursday morning, every Thursday morning. That was back when I had a lot of pediatric patients. And sure enough, this Thursday was that same type of day. And it doesn't happen like that often, but when it does, it feels good to finally get accomplished. You ever feel good after working really hard? That's what I told my daughter, who's now working over the summer break. And she said, it just gets busy at work. I said, well, one, it makes the day go by quickly. And secondly, makes you feel like you've accomplished something, doesn't it?
Well,
She didn't quite
I
get
grew up
that.
in a household where I had to continuously be productive. So yeah, sure, I'm used to that feeling. But I'm glad that as the father, you are now showing her what it means to be productive.
I told my other son that too. So he's been on assignment now like for 21 days straight, and they're working 21 days straight, 10, 12-hour days. And he comes home, he's exhausted. I'm like, don't you feel accomplished? And think about it, because you can actually say that you've done something that few other people in this world have done. I've worked 21 days straight, 10 hours a day. The few people can say that, and maybe that'll mean something a little bit later on when he gets older. But
I was gonna say because as we get older, you want to work smarter, not necessarily harder. And
that's
so,
true.
but speaking of medicine, I did hear
They're
that
still young.
they are. And as someone close to the generation, I can attest to that. Um, but speaking of medicine, your favorite person has reduced members from the CDC. How
It
did
got rid of an entire committee.
how are you guys taking this in the medical profession?
I have not had an opportunity to review the people who he now appointed. So those of you who don't know, RFK did actually fire the entire vaccine safety committee for the CDC, fired the whole team. And mainly because he said that they had conflicts of interest and things of that nature. Now, he then reappointed a whole team of people who were vaccine critics. And so we're waiting now to find out how all of that comes out. The thing about information is that information is so variable. You've got some studies that can be presented and they can refute some findings, and others come back and support it. One of the key tenets of the scientific method and doing any type of scientific research is reproducibility. If you can reproduce the results again and again, not just in your lab, but it can be reproduced in other people's labs, then you can actually presume it to have been accurate. And so when you get study after study after study that shows the safety and efficacy of vaccine, and then you remove the vaccine and then you see a recrudescence or a recurrence of a certain illness, then you start to realize, okay, well, maybe the studies were correct. And so I don't know that the studies necessarily need to be correct in order to satisfy RFK and their move for anti-vaccinism.
I bet to say, I mean, because at the same time, we're also in a state of age where you can find whatever study supports your theory or your hypothesis. And I feel like we're at a point, and you, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we're at a point where you can read whatever you think has been researched has already been done. Like there's nothing new. We've heard for years, well, probably well before even RFK's time, there have been critics of vaccinations, and people have tried to debunk some. And so, again, if you guys in medical school are studying the pros and cons and you're going through the research in terms of, okay, this is the number of people that the vaccine did, save, or these are the number of people who didn't get it and suffered unfortunate consequences, as well as these are the number of people who didn't get it and nothing happened. If you're looking at a whole composition of that and you've come to a conclusion, to me, at most, us as American people should at least know what that is. and not have that information hidden. And we can make the decision accordingly, but to essentially wipe out a whole board and then put your loyalists in there, you're depriving us. And yes, yes, the information is out there and available. At the same time, as we talked about before, social media is sometimes makes it harder to find both sides of an infinite of the coin.
Now,
And
people will argue the same thing on the other side. They'll say they were just vaccine loyalists who were on the committee. And, you can make that same argument. Say, well, now I got anti-vaccine loyal. You say that I have anti-vaccine loyalists. I say that you have vaccine loyalists and people who derive benefit from these vaccines as well.
well, and I think that was part of the question, whether people on the committee were researching it or whether they had already concluded that they were good. Because I mean, from my understanding, they were just researching and putting out, their findings and perhaps finding vaccines where there are none. And then again, that was just my understanding, but to remove it and simply say all vaccines are bad, it's the anti-vaccination, I don't know. But
Yeah.
anyways, yeah.
And the whole committee just basically we're reviewing either the studies that were submitted by the pharmaceutical companies regarding and their different phase trials and reviewing those results. And then have also, if there were some independent studies regarding a particular vaccine, they'd also look at those. But the issue is that those studies that were being reviewed obviously were performed by the pharmaceutical companies who were, of course, making the vaccine. And can you hold those companies accountable for any false? Can a pharmaceutical company falsify data? Absolutely. We've seen in the past where they've had adverse outcomes to some things and then later on decided, hey, I'm going to hide this data. And they've been punished for it. Eventually, all comes out. And then you get punished for it. You get, uh, prosecuted for it in many cases. So, yeah, you can look at, and I think we should look at data that comes from an affected source as skeptical as a potential bias, and that's built into this scientific review process. What are your disclosed biases? And when they're reading this stuff and they're reviewing these results, they do it from the lens of what are the biases in this. And then what people don't know is that there's a SEER database, and so what happens is when a drug goes through testing, it first undergoes into lab testing and testing in animals and eventually in humans and a larger group of humans. And then if all the results show that it's effective and that the side effects or the adverse events is tolerable, then it can actually go to the market after it's being approved by the FDA. But once a drug goes to the market, it is still monitored for 20 plus years by the FDA. And so what happens is doctors report adverse events to this database. And that does not necessarily require, the honesty of the pharmaceutical companies because it's no longer in the hands of the pharmaceutical companies. It's now in the hands of the doctors who are getting, not only just doctors, but even patients can actually report adverse events to a vaccination. And then each one of those things, particularly if it's a serious adverse event, those things are investigated. So there's a whole process that is set up by the CDC and the FDA to review the efficacy and ongoing efficacy and dangers of any vaccine or any medication that hits the market. And unfortunately, if you don't trust the government, then you're not going to trust the product of the government. And that's what we're seeing right now. It's got a lot of people who don't trust the government. What they want is an autocracy. And that's what they're getting from Donald Trump.
I don't even know what the people want anymore. I mean, again, other than, of course, a caste system, I will still stand on that. But we've had last weekend started some of the LA protests, and the Trump administration, without getting permission from the state or the local governments, decided to go ahead and put in the National Guard again. Typically, the process is the state or the local government will request federal intervention, but the Trump administration usurped that. It did go into a court. I think the lower court said that the Trump was wrong. I think another court said that no, it was fine for him to do that. So I'm sure that that's still going through the appellate process. But even in that, I mean, because from my understanding, and this is all again my quick understanding, so please, by all means, those listening, feel free if you want to know more to do some due diligence. But a lot of this started with Stephen Miller telling pretty much ICE to, and we're talking about the Immigration Customs Enforcement Committee, pretty much to go to Home Depot, go to farmers, go to where there are workers. And I think there's a misconception that if you are here and you have not received the official approval to be here, whether that's through a work visa or whether it's through a temporary stay, I think there's this misconception that then you are a criminal. And what really it means that you are civilly in violation, but it's not a criminal violation. And so when we're talking about, or at least when some people thought that when he said mass deportation, I don't know who these some people were, because again, we were on this podcast
Hispanics.
being very clear what he meant by mass deportation. But some
It's
people thought, oh, he was just going to get rid of the criminals. And again, we made it very clear, no. He even wanted to get rid of the Haitian workers, and those were people authorized to be here. But anyways, but now we're
and
seeing
did and did he stopped the TPA? The
he
TPA, I
did.
think is what it was.
He did. And so we know but again, like if you were thinking criminal, again, just because you're here and you haven't received that official authorization doesn't mean you're here criminally. Again, it's a civil violation. And so if you were thinking, oh, only the criminals will get out. Well, again, we talked about how maybe less than 1% of immigrants who are here, undocumented, or at least without authorization, are criminals. And so, yeah, they probably rounded those up easily. But it didn't proceed the numbers that they wanted. And so, what I'm hearing is, of course, Stephen Miller came and said, "Hey, go to where they work and start with Home Depot, start with farmers or whatever." And so they went to Home Depot, and that is one of the things that sparked the LA protests. And so they've talked about, of course, doing this in other cities. I think New York and Florida have already been targeted. I think the Florida Attorney General came out and said that y'all better not protest. We're going to essentially call the National Guard. We're not going to be like California. But again, and I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Governor Newsom, but I do appreciate that he came out and was very much against what Trump is doing and is very vocal about that. But that's why I say I don't even know what people want anymore, because if they start taking away farm workers, taking away workers at some of these entry level positions, that that's only going to increase the cost of goods. And if you're complaining about the economy, eggs are too high, whatever, and we see as Donald Trump has removed a lot of regulations, even on eggs, I feel like I see every day a recall of millions of eggs because you've removed those regulations that, yeah, may have caused the price to go up, but now the price is going up because the supply remains even more limited. But nonetheless, you're removing regulations. Now you're removing the labor. This is not going to help the economy in any form. So I don't know what people want.
What a king. I've come to the conclusion that that a lot, excuse me, a lot of white people in the country, and not just white. Let me not say that. First of all, you said
Non-black
those,
people.
yeah, and there's been more black people than usual. Want a king, and what they want, basically, what they want their way, regardless of what it costs to them. And it's a very short-sighted view because kingships never really work out very well for the people. You might start getting what you want in the beginning. You might want to see, the voter demographics, registration demographics stop browning. And you might want in the initial period to see all of these opportunities that have been given to Black people now be wiped away. But the long run, you don't know what the consequence of all of the authority you've given that one person will be. And I can guarantee you, power corrupts. And then it says that absolute power absolutely corrupts. And so I think the more absolute you make the power of the presidency, the more corrupt you're making him. I was watching something the other day talking about how, the Trump family grew $3 billion in 3 months. You're just like, that's a lot of money. The Trump family wealth and all the other people that were around him, these people are growing in influence, growing in wealth. And that's a that's a bill that's hard to unring once you've already rung it. And so you say, who are the people, all the people who thought that he was just going to deport it? It was the immigrants. And surprisingly, I was watching a video the other day about this woman who came up on the Latina woman, came up on the platform. I voted for Donald Trump and, going on war to America or whatever, such and such. And then after the presidency, she's like frantic because her family members and everybody is being abducted, detained, whether rightfully or wrongfully. They're being detained. Their civil rights are being violated, um, just basically based off of the color of their skin. You remember we were talking about this was a stop and frisk policy that they had, and how it was basically racially targeting, and that's what we're doing. We're racially targeting people. If you look like you're Hispanic, I have the authority. ICE have the authority. I'm sorry, um, to accost you and to apprehend you, cause you to prove that you belong here. And that's I get it. You want to get people who don't belong here out of the country. I get that. I'm sympathetic to that, but I'm also sympathetic to the fact that there needs to be some level of humanity to it. There was a quote that people said, people who will compromise their freedom for security deserves neither. I forgot who it was, it might have been Thomas Jefferson or
As
somebody like
long as
that.
you're acknowledging it wasn't you.
Say that
Um,
again. No,
as long as
it wasn't.
as
It
long as
wasn't me.
it wasn't you, was it?
It wasn't me, but
Even that, like, I don't know
it's
what it,
stated again. I mean, we're seeing it happen again. So they were talking about it with
and that
911, but
that's my
now we're seeing
point.
it again.
We're seeing it again, and to me, I don't even know what it means by I get that you don't want people who don't belong here. I don't even know what that means anymore. Because again, when we're talking to people, because just like you mentioned her, I'm hearing small businesses like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that they were going to take my workers. I just thought that they were going to look at the criminals. And you're talking to other people, well, I didn't realize that they had but there was online to have their stuff reviewed. I didn't realize there would be a due process. And so I don't even know what you thought. I don't even know what when you say, I get that you don't want people who don't belong here. I don't even get that because I don't even know what you mean by don't belong here. Because again, he was very clear, even his first term, when he did that Muslim ban. It was clear who he felt like should not be here. And it had nothing to do with honestly even your citizenship because we called it a Muslim ban. It was about religion. It was about brown and black people. And so and we saw it over and over again during his first term. We saw it when we were prosecuting him on things because to me that whole what happened in New York, the fraud, now he's getting out of it. And so this argument that, well, we didn't realize that we didn't know what we were getting. Oh, no, you knew. You had a first term. You saw that after that, January 6th happened, this is almost a repeat, but this one was at least peaceful. So now you're saying it was the January 6th was better and it caused, deaths on officers and it was the destruction of property that you pardon. Here, peaceful protests of a policy, of a public policy, something that again is embedded in our Constitution, and you send the National Guard. And to me, you're surprised. Like we knew this is who he was, and so this idea that you're going to get what you want, I don't even know what you're getting because to me, he was very clear when he said on the tariffs. Economists told you that it's not going to help the economy. It was very clear when it came even to some of these corporations you knew that you're going to lose out on this, and yet you vote for this. So I don't know who is getting what they want other than him. And if we're even want to go back in history, I mean, biblically, didn't God tell them you do not want a king? That is not something you want. And then when they insisted on it and it came, do we not learn from this? Do we at any point do we not say, you know what, we're Christians here. Yes, we've studied this before, and now we realize having a king is not what we want.
Desperation is a powerful force. It induces a lot of really erratic and uncontemplated, stupid decisions and behaviors. It really does. And so what are people desperate about? Christians are desperate that their voices are being, drowned out by those of those people who believe in more free lifestyles or who don't believe in a
By the
disciplined lifestyle.
Constitution, their voices are being
By the
drowned out by the
Constitution. Yeah,
Constitution. I mean,
that's
that's
it's
essentially it.
basically what it is. And so what you're saying is that as a Christian, we don't like the Constitution except for the parts that actually work for us. And then, so Christians' voices are being drowned out. White people's voices are being drowned out. Why are their voices being drowned out? Because the data has been saying for the longest that by 2050 or something like that, maybe 2035 or something, white people will no longer be the majority in this country. If you separate it out by individual race, yeah, they'll still be the majority. But if you look at white versus people of color, the number of people of color will outnumber the number of white people in this country drastically. And we're talking about within the next 10, 15 years that this is likely to happen. And so people are starting already to see, hey, this is adversely impacting me already in certain states. And certain states you see where, the people of color outnumber the number of white people. The white people have lost their influence in the voter booth. And so they're like, well, if we've lost our influence in the voting booths, then we need to reclaim it some other kind of way. So let's stop all this browning of America. And one of my dear friends, actually, we had a conversation, disagreement, a debate on Facebook, and he wound up saying, I think the quiet part out loud. He said, the voter demographic is changing in America due to immigration policy. I'm like, yeah, we've always been a nation of immigrants, and it was fine as long as those immigrants looked like you. But now, when those immigrants look like somebody else, you have an issue. And the problem isn't that the illegal immigrants aren't the ones who's changing the voter demographics because they're not able to vote. Now, to some degree, you can probably say that to some extent they are, because when an illegal immigrant comes to the United States and they have children, and those children become United States citizens, and those people are children of immigrants, and when they turn 18 years old, they help to influence the demographics of the country. And that's how the voting demographic of the country is going to change, or has been changing. And it's invoking a lot of desperation and fear in non-minority people because they like to keep the power. And I get it. I understand it.
I was gonna say,
It's a
I'm
scary
glad you get it
proposition.
because I don't get it. And maybe because I am a brown person. So, perhaps maybe that's part of the problem. But to me, again, other than the caste system, if that is your sole reason, then yes, I understand you're racist. Because that then is the conclusion. But if you're saying, oh no, I have a fear that I won't be able to have certain economic opportunities, well, you're losing out on that regardless of these immigration policies. I mean, when you look at AI, when you look at these corporations, when you look at Donald Trump is no more qualified to be in that position than perhaps even you. And so the fact that he feels entitled to it by virtue of the fact that he came from wealth, and by virtue of the fact that other people feel the same. I mean, that was part of the whole college scandal, was a lot of elite white people felt they should be entitled to the best schools above anyone else. That's part of the DEI initiative. People feel like, hey, I should be entitled to these positions above Black and brown people. They should be considered unqualified. They should have to prove themselves. Whereas by virtue of me being white, all I have to do is say, hey, I've applied and I've got the minimum requirements and I'm better than the perhaps on paper best qualified Black applicant. And so, again, other than the conclusion that you want to say you're racist, I cannot understand where you're coming from here. But even with that, because I do want to get into the topic for a little bit, because we talked about one father, because I do want to get from your standpoint as a father, if you think Donald Trump is a good father, because the one thing I know, we talked about this before, we talked about masculinity, the ability to provide, as well as the ability to teach your kids a certain legacy and then give them opportunities so they can grow that legacy. If you want to throw the moral book out of the window, do you think that he's a good father? And then from there, I want to bring in Diddy, because Diddy's a father too. And by that same argument, Yeah, we're watching him on trial, and I think this last witness was an ex. I think they called her Jane Doe just for privacy considerations. But I mean, she also talked about assaults that she experienced. She also talked about the freak offs that she engaged in, some willingly, and some she claimed she felt she did it out of obligation because he was paying her rent or because she was in love or whatever. And also, you know, the defense tried to bring in, well, you also went to another rapper's freak off. And so, you know, there's clearly something that you wanted to do, but she claims that when she read the Cassie lawsuit, she felt like it was a storybook of her own, um, essentially assault and abuse. And so, you know, again, put in that context, because I still imagine whether or not you want to say she did it consensually or not, I doubt that you as a father would be okay. And I think about every time his mom is in there, I'm just like, I don't know how you can sit through and listen to this. But I doubt you as a father would be okay hearing that this is how your son is spending his spare time. But even beyond that, do you think outside of that he's a good father?
I wouldn't want to be sitting in the courtroom listening to how my daughter was treated that way either as a father. Um, but the question, I guess that's a tough question when you say, is this person a good father? There's a lot of things that go into, I think, being a good father. And I don't know that you can blanketly say that one person is a good father or is not a good father. If I were to describe a good father, I would say one that father is present. First of all, first requirement, you must be present. And when I say present, I don't mean just physically present. I mean emotionally present, cognitively present, spiritually present, and and everything else that comes along with those levels of presence. Um, Two, I think you also have to be a provider. And if you're not providing for your family, whether you're present or not, I don't know how helpful you are if you're not providing. You're like, yeah, we were sitting, we always struggled, but I saw daddy there every day, right on the
He was a
couch,
Rolling Stone.
playing video games. And so there's a delicate balance, I think, that comes between provision and presence, because the more you try to provide, the less present you really are. And the more you are present, the less opportunity you have to provide, unless, of course, you come from a family of wealth, like Donald Trump did. And so I can't comment on whether he was present, his level of presence, his level of engagement with his children, even with Barron, his youngest one. I do think that the example that he provides for his children is not the type of example that I would like to present. And you see his children emulate that, because children do emulate they what they um idolize to some, and that's a bad word. Maybe that's a bad word to use, is idolize. But children, a lot of times that's what it boils down to. You almost idolize your parents until you get to the age of recognition that my parents are fallible. Now, for some children, depending on how bad that parent is, it might occur earlier in life. But a lot of times, children don't have that recognition until they're in their teenage years, or maybe even later. Oh, wait a minute, my parent is not quote unquote a god, because that's often how they treat it, because we control when they wake up, we control when they eat, where they go, what they do. We are in total control of their lives. And so a lot of times we're viewed as gods from them. One of the best gifts I got from my father was, I mean, from my son, my oldest son, he gave me a placard, says that a father is his son's first hero. I was like, oh, that's sweet.
Oh man,
And
why didn't he talk to me first?
you know, and he knows what's up. And it was and one of the most tender and sweet things that about this kid was probably 12 or 13 years old, and would still want to, if we were out in public, maybe not 13, I don't think, but he was a little bit older than what I would have thought that was happening. If we were out in public, he would hold my hand and we would walk down the street or something like that. And I remember at at 5 or 6, yeah, of course you think about that. You do that because you want to protect that child. But then at some point, that level of, or that desire to want to protect gets polluted. There's a song that Luther Vandross sings that says, dance with my father. And he says, back when I was a child, before life removed all the innocence, how he and his father would pick him up and dance with his mother and him and twirl him around. He described all these wonderful scenes about how his interactions with his father was. But the part that struck me was he said, before life removed all the innocence. And there is an innocence, I think, in wanting to hold your parent's hand. And as my child's 5 or 6 years old, they're wanting to hold it for protection, or I'm wanting to hold their hand for protection. So if something were to happen, I can snatch them back quickly. But then as you get a little bit older, then the reason why you want to hold my hand might not necessarily, I don't need you to protect me. I need you at this moment to just, I need to connect with you some way. I need to have some kind of union or relationship with you. And life tells us that that's abnormal. You shouldn't, he's 10 years old. He shouldn't be holding your hand like this. Or he's 12 years old. He shouldn't hold your hand like that. And if I were to be honest, I actually thought that myself. I was like, but then I had to check myself. Why? I said, this is a sweet, tender moment that your child wants to be affectionate still with you and to hold your hand. Why is that a problem? And I think it's because of life removed some of that innocence. But I digress a little bit because I thought it was a really nice
And you want to talk
sentiment.
about your son telling you you're his girl, which
But it was kind of nice to believe that you are your son's first hero, is that you're their father. And and when you are that, then they begin to emulate your behaviors. And they'll begin to, and so you see Donald and Eric Trump emulating a lot of their father's behaviors as well. And can you say that was good? I don't know. If you like his behaviors, then sure, you say that was good. Then that means he was a good father. But I look at my children now and I see a lot of my demeanors in them, a lot of my level-headedness, my calm demeanor. None of them goes off about anything. They look at things and they process things very rationally. Even my daughter does. And maybe that sounds like a little chauvinistic or something, but women get the bad stick of saying, hey, you're just too emotional and you don't, you move by emotion too often. I don't think that's true. I think what happens is that children learn what you teach them. And I taught my children, I think, to be a little bit more sober-minded and to be more rational and to contemplate things before you fly off the handle. So I don't hear my children yelling. I don't I don't hear my children getting into fights. It have floored me that I had two sons that have never fought each other. Like that never happened. I grew up in a house full of boys, and we didn't go 2 weeks without somebody fighting another person. But somehow my children became adults and have never been in a fight, in a fist fight. Now, some of that might be society because people don't fight anymore. They just pull out a gun and shoot and kill you. So
go on social media and bully you
yeah.
there.
But they've learned how to handle those. And so that's part of that being present, and that's part of the provision that we have to provide as, I think, as fathers. And when we don't do that, when we don't see ourselves and our children, the question is what have you provided? What have you, and have you been present? If you don't see that, I'm sure you can see a lot of your father's traits and characteristics in you, and maybe some of your mother's characteristics might be a little bit more dominant, but and maybe your father's characteristics might be, but I think it just really all depends on, you know, how you were created, but also how you were shaped too,
Well, I
and
mean, I
which
think whether your father is present or not, it's going to influence you because we see people who don't have their father present, and yet that has a lasting effect on them too, and how they're dealing with relationships or whatnot. It's interesting that you bring up Luther because I think I was watching a documentary and I think his father was in the music industry, and while his father died when he was young, you still see how much that resonated with him, and he pursued that path later on. But when we talked about masculinity, I mean, we were kind of clear to some degree why people may feel like, oh, it's gone away. I mean, I wonder if fathers take any accountability for why quote unquote masculinity has changed. Because again, like you said, if you're responsible for understanding, I'm going to influence this child, whether I am physically present or emotionally present or not, let me step into that role to make sure that what it is that they see and what it is that they hear is what I want to pass down. And I don't doubt from even the Donald Trump standpoint, giving what we see, I don't doubt he is probably proud of what he's passed down. I mean, his sons also have multiple wives or multiple girlfriends. His his sons also seek his approval, which is something that he did, Donald Trump did with his father. And so, I mean, you do see that reflected in them. And you know, Diddy unfortunately didn't have his father for most of his life, and so again, you can see the effect of not having a father. But again, other people step up because you know fathers aren't just limited to blood. Sometimes you have uncles, sometimes you have peoples in church that step up to become that paternal figure. But if you even choose to do that, should be still an understanding that hey, this person is going to watch what I do, whether I'm intentionally doing what I want him to do or not. You know, your ability to take into that and then be intentional about what you show and say, that to me makes for a good father.
I would agree. But a lot of times you don't think about that on a moment by moment basis. Because when you're shocked and you look at your children, you say, oh my God, that is like me. And then you see something that you don't like in them. And you're like, oh shoot, how did you get that? Well, you know where you got it from. There was a commercial way back, I think in the 80s or 90s or something. And there was one kid, it was a drug, it was an anti-drug picture, and the kid was smoking weed or drinking or something like that. And his father got mad. He found it. He said, where did you get this from? How did you learn this? And then the kid said, I learned it from you, Dad. I was like, ooh, there you go. That's
That's
a
one way to
problem.
shut you up, right?
Exactly. I learned it from you. And the things that we think that we're hiding from our children are attentive. They see all those things. They see how you talk to your mother. They see how you talk to their mother. They see when you're arguing and fighting in public. And you think you're behind your doors, and a lot of times small houses, it don't matter. If you raising your voice and you yelling at the kids in the next room, they're there. They understand. They're listening to how you treat or respect or disrespect their mother and the woman that's supposed to be important in your life. And so they develop to some degree. Some people will say, hey, this is the way you're supposed to treat persons. And then other people, and I don't know what triggers one person to think that way versus the other way and say, I'm going to do everything but that. And then there's some people who will then go and do the exact extreme opposite of it because they hated it so much. And I wish I was smart enough to know, how do you trigger somebody to do the exact opposite? I I will say that I think that if I was assessing my own fatherhood, mine probably lacked some of the affection that I should be a little bit more affectionate. Now, I don't think I'm necessarily that affectionate of a person with my children typically. But with my wife, yeah. But my children is just like, so, I've tried now to still be a little bit more intentional about hugging, about saying I love you. And I watch my oldest son and his children and his interaction now with his wife and with his now son, who my grandson. And I watch, I'm like, ooh, now watch the things that he does different from what I did maybe. And I think he intentionally says, okay, you know what? I didn't get this probably from my father. Let me make sure that I do this with my child. And I think where he learned some of that was from just watching his wife's family's interaction. He's like, oh, I kind of like how they interact like this. We didn't interact like this in my household. So I'm going to
Little
adopt some
boys
of those.
fighting, huh?
You know? Yeah, I recall one time getting a kiss from my father. And I think it was just one time that I remember my father gave me a kiss. And it was just not the way that they grew up in. You're like, you don't kiss a dude. And so I don't know, even if it is your son or whatever. And so I watch even my brothers, my interactions even with my brothers. I've got one brother who will anytime you see him, he want a two-arm hug. You know, like, man, that ain't normal. That ain't normal, not in America. That means you're a gay dude. And that's how people respond things, you know, this hyper masculinity that we have a lot of times in our society. But you know, we say, okay, bro code says it's good to clasp hands and then throw the other arm around your back. That's the way bros hug or something like that. But I call it my Narcotics Anonymous hugs because that's what they do. You see somebody who's been a narcotic NA, you know, when they hug, they give a full two-arm embrace. And I don't know if that's something that they're intent because I've never been to a meeting, but I think that it's something that they intentionally do to say, hey, you need to be able to have this type of affection. You need to have this type of affection, even from a man. You know, a lot of times we feel like we can get that from a woman and no issue, and it always becomes sexual. It doesn't always have to be sexual. Sometimes a two-arm embrace is just saying, hey, man, I got you. I got you. Sometimes it just means, hey, I love you and I'm going to embrace you completely like this and not be afraid by the constraints or the norms of society from giving you the type of love that you're definitely going to need. And when you don't get that, I think that's what drives some people into this is my own philosophy here, so this might get me in trouble. But I do think that people move into the realm of homosexuality for a variety of reasons. And I think sometimes men do it because they lacked the affection, they desired the affection of a man from their father, but they never got it. And as a result, they still grow up with a hole in their heart, wanting to be loved, wanting to be held, or wanting to be embraced by a man. Because I think a man's hug is different than a woman's hug. And when you lack that, you start processing that. And you're like, why do I want the affection of a man? And society tells you that if you want the affection and the embrace of a man, then that must mean that you're gay. No, it means that you are human. God created male and female, and He gave us both the capacity to love and gave us each the desire to receive that love from both a man and a woman. And because society told us that men aren't supposed to do that, because we're supposed to be snakes and snails and puppy dog tails, and the women are supposed to be sugar and spice and everything nice, then we don't do that. We don't get it. And we raise men that are deficient in the emotional stability and the emotional support that they need to have. And then they go find it in more pollutive ways. And they engage in homosexuality and I'm by no means am I saying that that's the reason why people go into homosexuality, but I do think that for some people, that's the way that they get introduced to homosexuality. Let me say it that way.
Yeah, and then you definitely went from 1 yard line to 100 yard line.
Yeah,
We're
one
talking
good
about
throw.
fathers to homosexuality. But
Hey,
but what I first of all, I don't think it's a hyper masculinity, and I know that that's what we talked about last time. I just think it's a hyper insecurity. But I also, again, I feel like culturally, you will find whatever the message is that you want to find. Because you can say, oh, well, women are supposed to be nice. Well, women also were culturally property. Women also were culturally supposed to only be about raising babies. And that is your purpose. And so, but you still had pockets of women saying, no, we want to, start businesses, or no, we want to be, contributors monetarily to the household. And so you can find whatever cultural pocket you feel like you want to hop into. What I think is so important about a father, which to me even goes beyond a mother, because if you want to, there are people that will make the argument that, hey, all I need is one parent, or my mother was my mother and my father. I definitely think both parents are needed, and I definitely think both parents play different roles. And to me as a father, again, if you've got a vision for your family, you've got a direction by which you want to lead your household, and you are doing that, that to me is a separate role than what the mother is doing. But also in that, when we're talking about training up a child, again, how you train your son is probably definitely different than how you're going to train your daughter. But specifically with both of them, you're still training them on what the role of a husband and what the role of a father is. And if when you were talking about, oh, I don't know how you go from an extreme, I often see people who are like, hey, I didn't have a father in my life, so I'm going to make sure I'm present, but yet you don't know what that means to be present. And so even in your physical presence, you are still absent because you haven't figured out or haven't gotten the tools to understand what it means to be emotionally present, all the stuff that you talked about in the form of presence. And I think often we do that. We say, well, I definitely don't want to do this, but then you don't look into what it is that you do want to do and what that looks like. And when you don't do that, you're still going to revert back to what your parents did, because again, that is trained in you. Whether you intentionally grabbed on it or not, as children, we're still often emulating what we see, even the absence of. And so that to me is one of those examples of you're trying to take this extreme position that, oh, I'm going to make sure I'm there, but you don't know what it still means to be there, and you're not getting the tools to make sure you are there. And I'm sure even like a Donald Trump, he would probably say, yeah, I'm there, but then, are you? Or, is your physical presence there, but yet some of this emotional, some of this, hey, do you know what it means to be a hands-on father? Do you know what it means to give that affection? And again, that may not be important to him. And so he may, on his own measure, say, no, I'm a good father because I at least tell my kids that I'm proud of them, whereas my dad didn't tell me that. Okay, well, you hit that one notch, but now at the same time, one, what are you proud of them for? And if it's the ability to suck up to you, again, we're subjectively thinking, okay, I don't know if that is if that really is any different than what your father did. And so I mean that to me is just where I then kind of pull into, because I know at the beginning you was like, well, I don't know what it means. I don't want to say what it means to be a good father, but I think we should say what it means. We should impose upon people, hey, listen, ask what you want to do, but then go seek it out. Don't just think it's gonna come to you just because all of a sudden a kid is here. If anything, if you acknowledge that, hey, I don't like how my father raised me, then you got to go find the father that you do like, or the parental figure that you do like. But don't just think you can wing it.
Yeah, I would disagree with one thing you said, and you were like that. You said that you would train your daughter different than you would your son. And when you said that, I said, do I really? And if I do, it's not because she's a female and he's a male. The reason I do, if I train one of them different than the other, it's because they are an individual. And so my two sons, I train and I interact differently. And I analyze and look at my children and find out what motivates them, what moves them. I think a good parent, a good father, studies their children and knows when something that they say, or they study their children's reactions to discipline. They study their children's reactions to exhortation and praise. And so then they learn how to be effective in utilizing those things. Some people would call that manipulation. I look at it, I, we had this
You're
conversation
training.
before. Yeah, it's training. You have to realize that I can't math. I couldn't teach math to my each one of my. I taught math to each one of my children differently. My first one, the very traditional method, and then I could probably intimidate him a little bit, like I was intimidated. You need to remember this, And I was like, okay, well, my second son, I love the way that he learned because I could tell him the hardest one was like 9 plus something. Okay. So 9 plus 6. I was telling it's 1 less than 10 plus 6. He could get that his brain worked that way where if you know what 10 plus 6 is because it's easy, right? 16. So then 9 plus 6 is 1 less than 10 plus 6. And so he could, oh yeah, I got that. And so he could process it and grab it that quickly. Then I tried that with my daughter. My daughter was like, that is just not helping. That is just not working.
New
And
teacher
she,
things.
and she will bust out in tears. And I'm like, oh, Lord, what am I doing here? Okay, so now I have to try a different approach for them. And so we don't parent the same with each one of our children, take the same approach with each one of them. We study our children. I think my philosophy is that we study our children and we learn how best to motivate them and teach them in ways that are going to be most effective to them. because they're going to learn one way or the other. The question is how effective are you going to be the one as the one who teaches them? And so I do think that it's very important for us as parents to be observant of those children. I know as a child myself, I was never one that needed to. You didn't have to whip me. You could have just told me you were disappointed in me, and I'd be like, parents are disappointed. I
Somehow,
just
I find it hard to believe. I've been to like, I'm disappointed in you. You want a whole full spreadsheet. Well, let's discuss at what point did the disappointment occur, and let's make sure it's justified.
My brothers used to call me buckets. And the reason why they would call me buckets is because instantly my eyes would just fill up with water and tears. And I'd be trying not to blink. They'd be like, don't blink, don't blink. And then all of a sudden, they blink and the tears just gonna come out. But I was a very sensitive child, so you really didn't have to, I didn't have to be whooped. You could have disciplined me. I've made the mistake of telling my mother that once, and
Clearly,
that
you need
didn't
to
come
be
out.
whooped because you realize that was a mistake.
Yeah. And I was probably 25 years old when that happened. And I think if she could have whipped me, then she probably would have whipped me.
Well, and I will defer to you because you're the parent. I would dare say just, I mean, of course, all your kids are going to be different, and all of them are going to learn different, and that's something teachers have to understand too. But I still think that when it comes to male and female, there is a femininity and a masculinity that also has to be taught, and it's taught differently to me if someone's a male versus female. Now, again, I don't disagree with your overall, concept of, hey, you still have to make sure, hey, what is God calling this person versus this person? And callings can be completely different, or how God created them is completely different. But God also created them in their gender. And I do think that, even biblically, there are responsibilities and roles based on that gender that I think you should teach accordingly. But yeah, I don't think you just say, hey, you're a female, so I'm not going to teach you any of things about provisions or not, because no, so
Yeah.
you may never
You
be.
need to know how to change a tire too.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
you need to know how
Right.
to
You may
jump a
never be,
battery.
yeah,
All
you
those
need to be
things.
self-sufficient as well. But also I'd imagine, you probably have a little bit more patience if she says, hey, I'm on the side of the road. I got you. Versus your son, hey, I'm on the side of the road. What you calling me for? You know how to change a tire.
There's one thing I do want to say in our final minute here or so on the show. There's a scripture, and I can't remember what it is. It says, "Fathers, provoke not your sons to anger, lest they be discouraged." That passage right there really resonated with me as a parent, particularly as a parent of sons, because it talks about don't provoke your sons to anger, because there's a lot of ways that we as parents, as fathers, when our sons start getting our right age, that age of maturity, and they start bucking up against you and get you all height, and they feel like they can take you at some point, we still have to remember that there are things that we can say that will destroy our children. And I think in the heat of the moment, we don't pay attention to those types of things. And as good parents, as responsible parents, we have to be aware of everything that we say that comes out of our mouth, how that thing can be destructive to our children.
Well, on that note, hopefully you guys have not only stayed tuned in, but commented and liked this episode. We are here every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Also, catch us on your favorite podcast platform. You can catch a repeat of this episode on Star Radio and K-Day Live. And if you have not gone over to our YouTube page and subscribed and followed, please be sure to do so. So until next Saturday, guys, thank you so much for tuning in and have a blessed week.